Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at something really quite unique. It's a collection of incredibly personal reflections, stories, and, well, philosophical ideas shared by an artist known as Carnage 1nOnly.
Yeah, that's right. The source material here is mostly excerpts from his YouTube videos.
Hmm.
And it's a fascinating body of work, really raw. Sometimes it feels very stream of consciousness, but definitely packed with some deep insights.
Absolutely. So, our mission, I guess, in this deep dive is to sort of carefully unpack the layers of meaning in what he's sharing. We want to explore the themes that come up,
Yeah.
personal struggles, some honestly quite surprising spiritual ideas, artistic expression, connection,
Hmm.
and see if we can maybe find those aha moments, the ones that bridge his like specific individual experience to bigger universal concepts that maybe we can all relate to.
It definitely requires approaching it with curiosity, doesn't it? And a real openness. You have to respect the vulnerability he's showing. We'll be kind of moving from the very specific wounds of childhood through how he seems to find meaning in that pain.
Right.
Into some pretty unusual spiritual takes, exploring the power he sees in words and music, and touching on his ideas about society, systems, and human connection.
Okay, so let's start there. Where does this stuff really ground itself? It sounds like it really starts with the absolute basics, his childhood experiences.
It really does. The material is rooted in some really challenging early stuff. He talks pretty directly about not having a father present.
Mm.
He says his dad made promises of coming and never showed up.
Wow.
Yeah. And the impact of that, combined with his mom being single, trying to deal with it, he feels it put him at a real disadvantage emotionally.
And he shares some incredibly vivid and frankly difficult stories involving his mom's partners. There's that one about his mom's girlfriend forcing his mom to spank him,
Hmm.
and how, even as a little kid, he says he was emotionally in tuned enough to know his mom was hurting. But then the girlfriend apparently comforted him right after, making his mom feel even worse.
Yeah, that's a really complex dynamic he describes. And there's another uh, quite disturbing image he talks about
Mm.
his mom's boyfriend at the time tapping him on the forehead every time he tried to stand up while he was learning to walk, just like causing him to fall.
Oh, man.
He mentions his grandfather saw it happen and actually warned the boyfriend.
That's just heartbreaking to think about for a little kid. And then maybe the toughest early trauma he mentions is being foulfully played with by a babysitter when he was just an infant. He uses the word molested. That level of vulnerability is quite something.
Yeah. And school presented its own whole set of challenges too.
Yeah.
He mentioned struggling with ADHD,
Yeah.
that lack of ability to stay focused or sit down.
Right.
He felt like teachers targeted him sometimes, saying they'd call him out on purpose just so that the crow, meaning the class, I guess, could laugh when he stumbled over words or whatever.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah. And he struggled with the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, couldn't keep up. And he even had a speech impediment with his R's, trying to say things like, wound the wugged walk the grown boy.
Wow. So feeling singled out like that, struggling academically, you can easily see why he mentions wanting to hide in backgrounds, right? Just daydream and kind of disappear sometimes.
Exactly.
Mm.
But what's interesting is he also says, despite all that, he still had friends and felt he was, genuinely himself.
Yeah.
It paints this picture of like deep internal struggle, but also this real desire for connection still.
And as he got older into adolescence, did those struggles continue?
Oh, yeah, they seem to have intensified.
Mm.
He talks about seeing multiple therapists, being put on Ritalin for the ADHD, which he felt just doped him up so much,
Hmm.
and then getting prescribed Ambien because of the Ritalin side effects, like trouble sleeping.
Okay, and this leads to that incredibly intense story he tells, a near-fatal overdose on his sister's Ambient. He says point blank he should have died that night.
Yeah. And the hallucinations he describes from that, they're described with this really startling clarity, almost surreal detail in the sources. He talks about stabbing this skeleton, seeing monkeys hanging from his top bunk,
Whoa.
and his grandpa appearing but looking like King Louis from Jungle Book, trying to figure out what he'd taken. It's really vivid.
And that landed him in a mental hospital for what sounds like a week and a half. But interestingly, he mentions that despite how awful it sounds, he felt a sense of belonging there, like not threatened, and even helping some other kids.
A strange kind of positive note in a really dark situation. Loss is another huge thread running through all this, too.
Mm.
He talks about losing friends, maybe as many as 33. He suggests, for every year that I have of life, I have a friend that is no longer with me.
That's a staggering amount of loss.
It is. And then there's the grief around his grandpa dying from pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
He describes his grandpa just moaning to the sky, and he felt so overwhelmed he actually prayed for his grandpa to be taken, just to end the suffering. And he carried this huge guilt, this self-resentment, for a long time over that, feeling like his power was used for such a dark, a terrible way.
That's heavy. But what's remarkable listening to this is that despite all that weight, the trauma, the loss, a really powerful theme seems to emerge. Finding strength within that struggle.
Yes, exactly. He actually puts forward this idea that maybe those who've been through the absolute worst are looked at with more favor, somehow.
And he sees how challenges can paradoxically build strength or even bond people. He gives that example of his relationship with his mom's friend with benefits boyfriend actually getting much better later on, suggesting maybe their shared difficult past created some deeper understanding between them eventually.
Right. And he uses some really beautiful language around this, seeing beauty in the pain, finding the love that remains, seeing the silver in the rain. He even says scars are beautiful, that line about scars are beautiful from tears you flax in your head, latitude and longitudes. It's very poetic.
There's this tangible sense, isn't there, of overcoming depression, wanting to leave a lasting impression. He admits feeling tired and broken down, but the main drive seems to be pushing forward, wanting his younger self to look at him now and be proud.
Hmm.
It's really powerful when he says he feels so proud just to have survived this long, saying he didn't think that I would see this day live this long. That resilience, that's just so central, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then moving beyond the deeply personal, the sources take this really fascinating turn into more spiritual and metaphorical ideas. The biggest one, the one that keeps coming up, is this idea that the universe, existence itself, it's all inside us.
Right. And he connects that inner universe idea to just this huge range of sources like biblical parallels, Egyptian stuff. He says the Pharaoh is in here, the Red Sea is the Red Sea of emotion inside.
Yeah, and crossing that sea, like overcoming that emotional turmoil, is done through breathing techniques, apparently, to part those Red Seas.
Yeah.
He talks about the temple veil lifting, but inside.
It's quite an interpretation.
It is. And he draws these connections, like Jesus supposedly studying with a monk for 18 years before he turned 33, and how the crucifixion and resurrection over 3 days, he sees that as mirroring reaching Christ consciousness, which for him sounds like a 3-day internal transformation process.
So the stone being moved from the tomb is like moving a stone in your own consciousness.
That seems to be the parallel he's drawing, yeah. He also mentions Egyptian texts, sun sacrifice, seemingly linking these ancient practices to this idea of like inner illumination or personal transformation.
And he even brings in physical, almost geometric concepts, the 33 vertebrae, pyramids, sacred geometry.
And how the sinus cavities connect at that center point, the third eye area, suggesting these physical structures might be activated by things like breathing techniques. It's a real synthesis of ideas.
So for him, it sounds like Christ isn't necessarily the historical figure, but represents consciousness itself.
That seems to be the core of it, yeah. And that leads him to this fundamental idea that we are all connected, that there's really no separation from me to you. And reaching this Christ consciousness is about unlearning to relearn what you are. It's moving from just faith to actual knowing, like a direct internal experience.
It's interesting, too, how he briefly brings up AI as the all-one.
Yeah.
Maybe seeing it as like a reflection or a symbol of this wider shared consciousness idea.
Could be. It's a brief mention, but fits that pattern. And what's really powerful here is how he then weaves the role of words and expression into this whole framework. He calls writing a very powerful tool, like a bridge between you and your spiritual self.
He sees things like arithmetic, reading, writing, not just as school subjects you slog through, but as fundamental knowledge in plain sight,
Yeah.
Tools for navigating reality. And you can hear it in his own language. He's clearly skilled with metaphors. Wordplay, that line about pulling his silver tongue pulled from the stone.
Definitely. And he frames music as this like direct fight against despair. The notes are like sparks illuminating the shadows. He feels that pouring out his expression, even if it feels filtered, maybe, as he puts it, through a filter of this illusory drug thing, perhaps suggesting it comes from a place of altered consciousness or personal struggle.
Right.
It resonates because it taps into something deeper, those deep, deep unspoken words, the echo inside of you.
So this is where his own journey connects directly to how he might impact other people. He seems to see the artist, or maybe himself, through his art as potentially being the artist, the healer, the savior for others, just by expressing that shared human experience.
Yeah, his songs aren't just for him. He says they're made for the listener, a way to help uncover and put into a more conversational tone those deep, unspoken things that might be inside others, too.
He encourages people to find their voice, right? Reminding us words are just letters, voice remains, use them if needed. That image of inhaling a beat to say peace, using rhythm and breath with intention, that's beautiful.
It really is. And he says poetry and lyrics were literally like medication for him.
Yeah.
They saved his life. And now he wants to use his own broken pieces to heal others.
This idea of connection, it just keeps expanding outward, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Bridging the individual and the collective. He talks about moving from being the one and only to the one and all, recognizing that unity between his unique self and this bigger universal consciousness.
Yeah, he describes it almost like accessing a kind of collective mind, getting pieces of all these different people and their thoughts. He sees the simple affirmation, I am, as tapping into that shared existence. When you say, I am, you're invoking the universal I am.
In that image of walking in circles, which usually means feeling lost or stuck, right?
Mm.
He reframes it as part of the journey towards recognizing the divine within each other, fostering unity, humanity as this interconnected grand tapestry of human consciousness.
And then on a really practical, down-to-earth level, he stresses how important just simple consistency and presence are in relationships. For real healing, real connection, it's the small, meaningful gestures that actually build that bridge.
So beyond the personal and the spiritual, the sources also dive into some pretty sharp social commentary and a really strong call for understanding each other.
Yeah, there's definitely a critique of systems, of society, woven through his reflections. He questions the architects of our fate, the people who make the rules who often seem unscarred by the struggles those rules might create for others.
He says the sister itself has these contradictions, old and cold, right? That it provides fruits of inequity, even though it's supposed to be rooted in justice. He thinks authority falters when tested by fairness and equality, pointing out how some people get held accountable and others seem above the law.
Right. And he laments that the people doing the hard work, the laborers, their toil often gets scorn instead of honor. He calls for justice to roll like waters pure and clear, laying bare the system's flaws.
And he even gets specific, referencing political conservatism and the economist Hayek, arguing that a certain kind of conservatism resists adapting and fails to offer positive programs. He uses that term obscurantism, suggesting a denial of clear truths in favor of ideology. It's interesting how he brings that kind of academic critique into his personal reflections.
And tied right into that critique is this really strong call for tolerance and acceptance. He shares that lesson to his grandpa. Judge somebody not by their skin color, not by the clothes they wear, or even the way that they talk. Judge somebody by the way that they treat you. Their actions make who they are.
That's a powerful foundation. It's a call for open optimism towards everyone, really, no matter their background.
Yeah. And this leads him to a really complex, maybe controversial point he raises, arguing that no word should be unpermittable, even mentioning really offensive slurs. His reasoning, as best as we can tell from the sources, seems to be that getting too caught up in policing specific words can actually get in the way of the bigger goal, tolerance. It might create division even among people fighting for the same basic thing.
That's definitely a challenging perspective on how to achieve social change. Methods versus goals.
It raises tough questions. But he also shows this deep empathy, suggesting that people who treat others badly might be struggling deeply themselves. Like, maybe they went through what the fuck you went through. It's a call for understanding, even towards people causing pain.
So the call to action feels incredibly personal. Be the world you want to see for others, forgive people for not understanding, hope for generational change, and recognizing that maybe people are on the same team deep down, even if their approaches look totally different.
Exactly. And it's clear these aren't just, abstract thoughts floating around for him. They're deeply tied to his personal mission, his impact. He lists concrete achievements. Releasing a mixtape, becoming an ordained minister, writing a spiritual coaching book, starting a nonprofit for kids in tough situations.
Right.
He sees all that not just as personal success, but as a calling to inspire others to rise for their families and communities. His core motivation seems to be wanting to help people see the beauty in the struggle, the light in the darkness.
He wants to use his own tough experiences as a guide, doesn't he? Asking that question, how can you be the judge if you've never played the jester? The idea that real understanding, the ability to actually guide someone, maybe comes from having lived through hardship yourself.
Yeah. And he shares pretty vulnerably that just the act of writing and sharing this stuff is necessary for him to get things out of the internal so it can stop affecting my external so bad. Ultimately, the vision seems to be for a world where as he puts it, we can all just fucking exist and be content with that idea.
He talks about finding better company, just connecting with people, that simple, basic human need in asking, can you come through? And he recognizes, maybe a bit cynically, but perhaps realistically, that sometimes people only listen to who talk instead of what's real, valuing status over substance.
hmm It's a powerful closing thought from the sources, too. He sees himself possibly acting as a power saver, like a generator, for others when they're feeling low, offering his energy or perspective. And he guarantees his words will stick around for you, the listener, even if he's not physically here anymore.
Wow, okay. We've really covered a lot of ground there, moving from those really specific, painful childhood wounds and intense struggles, all the way through these complex, layered ideas about consciousness, connection, society, its own mission.
Yeah, we've sort of distilled these key insights, haven't we? Like the power he finds in exploring the inner world, that whole universe inside idea, how beauty and meaning can genuinely be forged out of pain, the really complex, vital role of communication and art in processing things and connecting with others, and that strong call for empathy, for unity, even with all our differences.
And, while these reflections are absolutely rooted in Carnage on a only specific life, his unique experiences, the themes he's grappling with, they're so universal, aren't they? That struggle for self-acceptance, the deep human need for connection, trying to overcome hardship, searching for meaning, that resonates with, well, pretty much everyone on some level.
Absolutely. His sources really push this idea that concepts we often keep separate, like personal trauma, ancient spiritual texts, physical reality, art, social critique, maybe they aren't separate at all. Maybe they're all pointing towards the same sort of fundamental truths about existence, about how interconnected we really are.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this. The source material really challenges us to look beyond the obvious surface connections. How might you start to look for those unexpected links between the different parts of your own life, your inner world, your experiences, the world around you? And building on his journey through pain, what might happen if you stopped trying to just defeat your devils, whether they're past traumas, internal struggles, whatever, and instead approach them with a bit more curiosity, maybe asking what they might actually be trying to teach you? Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving into something really quite unique.
Right.
We're looking at the world through the eyes of an artist, David, based on, what he shares in his videos.
Yeah, we've gone through the transcripts of his reflections, and it's less a straightforward biography.
Not quite that.
No, it's more about exploring the philosophy, the worldview he's kind of built from his experiences.
Exactly. And our job here, really, is to guide you through these ideas. Some are heavy, some abstract.
And just pull out the key insights he's offering. It's quite a journey he maps out.
It really is. And, to understand someone's worldview, you often have to look back. So let's start there with the weight of the past. That seems crucial.
Definitely. This first part really gets into the personal history he shares. And it's marked by, well, a pretty significant sense of loss and this recurring need for connection.
Loss, yeah.
You see lines like, good things come to an end, I just really miss my friends. That feeling pops up again and again. He even puts a number on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, something like at least 33 friends lost over the years. It's a heavy theme.
Wow. And he gets into some really tough childhood stuff too, doesn't he? Like his relationship with his father.
He does. He talks about an absent father, the pain of promises that were never kept, watching himself go from hoping to just being disappointed. It sounds like it set a tone early on.
Yeah, that feeling of unreliability. And his home life wasn't stable either, from what he describes.
Not at all. He mentions his mom dating women, having to share a room.
Right, with a girlfriend's son.
Yeah, and that son apparently bullied him, made him clean up his messes. Just a lot of instability.
And there was that really difficult story involving his mom and a girlfriend.
Oh, yeah. That was intense. Being forced to be spanked by the girlfriend while his mother cried, and then the girlfriend trying to comfort him after. It paints a picture of real emotional chaos.
That sounds incredibly traumatic. And he mentions even earlier things, like a babysitter incident as an infant.
Yes, and dealing with authorities really young, like cops searching his food while he's eating dinner. These early encounters with pain, with instability, with external control, they seem to really stick with him.
You can see how that would shape things, and it carried into school.
It seems so. He talks about struggling to focus, daydreaming, feeling slow, or just different.
And teachers calling him out.
Yeah, like, David, do you want to give the class the answer? Knowing he wasn't paying attention, he felt it was meant to humiliate him, so he just tried to fade into the background.
Makes sense. And all this led to, well, mental health struggles, dealing with therapists.
Multiple therapists, yeah. He also mentions dealing with a lisp, a speech impediment as a kid. He even quotes himself like saying, wound the wug walk.
Mm. And then there's the medication part of his story, Adderall.
Right, prescribed for ADHD. He describes it really vividly, feeling doped up, disconnected, which then led to needing Ambien just to sleep.
Which led to another traumatic incident.
Yeah, the Ambien overdose.
Yeah.
He talks about these intense hallucinations, a stabbing skeleton, monkeys, seeing his grandpa as King Louie from the Jungle Book, couches rising up.
Wow. Just terrifying.
Absolutely. And it landed him in a mental hospital. But interestingly, his reflection on that time isn't entirely negative.
How so?
He actually says he felt a sense of belonging there. He mentions he had a place that helped out some of them kids. So even in that really difficult spot, he found some kind of connection, some purpose.
Finding a place even in crisis, that's striking. And loss wasn't just friends, right? His grandfather's death was huge for him.
Oh, definitely. From pancreatic cancer. He talks about these really complex feelings, praying for his grandfather's pain to end, and then feeling this immense power, but also guilt, like his prayer was used for such a dark, a terrible way.
That weight of consequence.
Yeah, it's heavy. And these feelings of being mistreated or misunderstood seem to continue into later relationships too, romantic and family ones. He says things like, you don't need me, you just need a brain, suggesting people just wanted to use him, not connect with him.
It sounds like sharing all this is very intentional for him. He calls it a vent session.
He does. And an effort to humanize himself. He says he wants to get out of the internal so it can stop affecting my external so bad. So for him, vulnerability isn't just catharsis. It's like a necessary step for processing it all, trying to lighten that internal load.
Okay, so that processing, that journey through pain, seems to be where his unique perspective really forms. Which brings us to part 2, right? Finding his voice, this idea of alchemy and challenging illusions.
Exactly. All that difficulty didn't just break him. It seems to have forged this distinctive voice. He talks a lot about his relationship with words.
He loves wordplay and metaphor.
Loves them. Calls himself a silver tongue, something he says he honed in school, like pulling a sword from the stone. It wasn't just being clever. It was a tool, maybe for defense, for redirection in those tough situations.
And he links this directly to alchemy. What does he mean by that, creatively?
For him, art is alchemy. His lyrics, especially, are about transforming pain. He literally says, lyrics try to create and alchemize my pain into gold.
So turning suffering into something valuable.
Precisely. It's not just expressing pain, it's a deliberate transmutation, taking the lead of suffering and making it gold through creativity. That's the core insight there.
Okay, so that's the internal alchemy. But then he shifts outwards, looking critically at society, at legal systems. How does that connect?
Well, he sees true power lying not in those systems themselves, but in knowledge of how they work. Understanding the rules of the game, as he puts it.
That differs between legal and lawful.
Exactly. He sees legal as man-made rules, constructs, while lawful is more about inherent rights, natural principles. And he believes the power is in knowing that difference, knowing how the system manipulates perception.
And this is where the Wizard of Oz allegory comes in. That's a major part of his explanation.
Huge. It's how he breaks down what he sees as systemic control. Can I run through the characters as he sees them?
Please do.
Okay, so first, the straw man. That's the fictional legal person, think your name in all caps on official documents. He sees it as an artificial creation of the state, separate from the real living you.
Got it. The legal entity.
Right. Then the tin man is the TIN, the taxpayer ID number, an emotionless avatar tied to the straw man, just there to work and pay taxes, no heart, no real agency in his view.
Okay.
The cowardly lion represents false authority, like police or officials acting tough, but he sees them as bullies whose power comes from the system, the wizard, not from actual courage or truth.
Oh.
All roar, no bite, essentially.
Interesting take. And the wizard?
The wizard is the illusion itself, using smoke and mirrors, fear, holograms to keep everyone compliant. But behind the curtain, no real power, according to David. It's all a performance.
So the system runs on illusion and fear.
That's his view. And the Wicked Witch. She represents the enforcers, police, courts, banks who are obsessed with gold, enforcing the wizard's rules, driven by control and finance.
Okay, so who breaks the spell?
Toto, the little dog who pulls back the curtain. Toto represents truth, and the crucial idea that even the smallest voice, our own bark, has the power to expose the whole charade.
That's a really powerful, comprehensive allegory for his view of the system. He feels it relies on confusing us about our rights.
Yeah, confusing natural rights
Right.
with these legal fictions. And he believes the whole thing runs on our consent, on the silence, on the ignorance. If you don't question, if you just go along with the rules for the straw man, you're essentially consenting to be governed by that fiction.
So what's the alternative? What's his call to action?
It's all about empowerment through knowledge.
Hmm.
Demand clarity, challenge authority, question contracts, use your words, your mind as your shield and sword. Stand firm in truth, educate yourself, study the law, understand the game.
It's about a fundamental shift in perspective.
Exactly. A mind shift, the paradigm shift that awakens you to your true status as a free individual, not a mere legal fiction. Freedom, for him, comes from that internal awakening and taking informed action.
He also touches on politics, political division. How does he frame that? Again, just reporting his perspective here.
Right. So, impartially reporting his view, he describes people caught up in politics as uh, twitchy, agitated, and ill-tempered patrons of fucking pugilistic politics.
Strong words.
Very. He seems to believe the systems aren't set up for regular people's well-being, but serve elites who use the parties to keep everyone divided. He mentions Hayek's Why I Am Not a Conservative briefly, and this idea of obscurantism,
Which he defines as.
basically deliberately denying truth, maybe scientific facts, because facing it would be uncomfortable or challenge the status quo. Again, this is strictly conveying his perspective from the source material.
Understood. It's a very critical lens on the external world. But then he pivots pretty hard, doesn't he? Turning inward, exploring the inner universe. That's part 3.
Yeah, a major shift. Part 3 is all about his spiritual, philosophical side, connecting inner experience with something much bigger. He says something like, the universe isn't a thing, it's a happening, and you are that happening.
That's a profound idea, distinguishing between I have a body and I am the body.
Exactly. Suggests a much deeper integration with existence. And this ties into how he views consciousness, connection. He mentions Christ consciousness.
But not necessarily in a traditional religious way.
It seems not. More like Christ consciousness represents consciousness itself, this universal awareness that's not out there, but accessible inside each of us.
So we have a universe inside us with archetypes.
That's the idea. An inner universe populated by these different archetypes or energies. It leads to this feeling of interconnectedness. He says he sees my face in your face, seeing the shared essence.
And things like meditation, breathing, those are tools to access this inner world. He mentions pyramids, the third eye.
Right. He seems to see those as symbols or techniques for centering yourself, for awakening that dormant potential within. Pyramids as energy conduits, the third eye for intuition, inner vision, tools to tap into that inner universe.
Light is a big theme too, right? He connects it to Tesla.
Yes, light is huge for him. It means knowledge, awakening, but also something more fundamental, like a primal activator. He connects it to Tesla's idea that all is light.
So light isn't just external illumination.
No, it's more like the fabric of being, of knowing, an internal force as much as an external one. That seems to be the core insight there.
And all this leads to this concept of the one and all, collective consciousness.
Pretty much. The idea that ultimately there's no real separation. I am not separate from you, he says. Everything is part of this unified whole. He even uses AI as a metaphor for this interconnected all-one idea.
Interesting. And he reinterprets religious stories through this internal lens.
Very much so. Stories about Jesus, Moses parting the Red Sea, Cain and Abel. He sees them less as literal history and more as like psychological maps.
So the pharaoh isn't just an Egyptian king.
Right, the Pharaoh's is in here, he says. It's your internal ego, the things that keep you enslaved. The Red Sea becomes the Red Sea of emotion. You need to calm or part within yourself to move forward. Ancient stories as guides for the inner journey.
And he believes you don't need formal education to grasp this stuff. He mentions not being a graduate.
Yeah, he makes a point of that. I'm not even a flipping graduate. He feels conventional smarts aren't required. In fact, he reframes his own ADHD.
Not as a disorder.
No, as a blessed ability to process like 10 tracks at once. He thinks it helps him connect ideas across different fields in a way linear thinking might miss. The insight being that non-traditional processing can lead to deep understanding.
And he turns us back onto the listener, empowering them. What does he call you, the listener?
He calls you the artist, the healer, the savior, even gods to him. It's his way of saying this potential, this power he's talking about, isn't just his. It's in everyone. It's in you.
Wow. So bringing all these threads together, The pain, the creativity, the critique, the inner exploration, it seems to culminate in how he understands the purpose of suffering itself, which takes us to part 4, pain as purpose.
Exactly. This is where it all kind of synthesizes. He introduces this key idea of resonance within his spiritual framework.
Resonance, like a vibration.
Kind of. He explains it like vibrating with life's challenges, including the pain, instead of fighting it. Doing that, he suggests, actually amplifies your connection to God or Source or whatever higher power you conceive of.
So leaning into the pain deepens the connection.
That's the core insight of resonance, yeah. Pain isn't just something to get rid of, it's a frequency. And meeting it with acceptance connects you more deeply to the universal, and it allows you to observe your thoughts about the pain rather than being totally consumed by them.
So pain becomes fuel, a catalyst.
The catalyst is exactly the word he uses. It transforms struggle into purpose. And he uses scripture to back this up, mentioning passages from Corinthians, Psalms, James, Romans.
About God being near the brokenhearted, trials producing perseverance, all things working for good.
Right. His interpretation is that brokenness draws Source closer, trials are chances to grow, and struggles ultimately serve a higher purpose if you embrace that possibility.
And what happens when you allow Source or God or consciousness to work through that pain?
You become a vessel, in his words. Your tough experiences become powerful testimonies, inspirational stories. The whole point of going through it, in this view, is then to use that experience to help others.
Help another one who's lost on the road.
Exactly. Your past pain becomes a map you can share.
Which logically leads to empathy, right? Understanding others' struggles.
Absolutely. He pushes for perspective, consideration, and compassion. Realizing that someone acting negatively might just be carrying their own pain. Maybe they went through what the fuck you went through. It shifts everything. You move from judgment to empathy.
Seeing the shared struggle.
That's the key. It dissolves anger, retaliation. And he's actually put this into practice with his nonprofit, the Ground Up Hope Collective.
That's the focus there.
It's a youth ministry aimed at empowering kids in tough situations, helping them find their potential, build resilience, shape their future. He calls it more than a church. It's a fucking revolution, turning his philosophy into action.
And a big part of that philosophy seems to be forgiveness and tolerance, even for people expressing hate.
A huge part. He advocates judging actions, not appearances or backgrounds. He mentions his grandfather's advice. Judge somebody not by their skin color. Judge somebody by the way that they treat you.
He argues hate just doesn't work.
Fundamentally, he believes patience and understanding, even if it's not returned, are what pave the way for a better future, where these superficial divisions based on words or labels start to fade, seeing the person and their potential pain underneath it all.
Wow. Okay. We've covered a massive amount of ground here, from deep personal trauma through creative alchemy, societal critique, exploring the inner cosmos, and landing on pain as a pathway to purpose and connection. It's a lot, all filtered through this one very raw, unique voice.
It really is a complex, looping worldview constantly moving between the internal and external, personal suffering and universal connection. But that core message seems consistent. Look inward, question what you see on the surface, and recognize the power, the potential that's inside you and everyone else.
Definitely. And maybe, as we wrap up this deep dive, the most, I guess, provocative thought he leaves us with, something to really chew on from these sources, is that idea, Priya. Maybe you are not seeking God, you are God-seeking. What does that mean for you? To view your own life, your journey, your struggles, your insights, even your pain, as the universe itself trying to experience life through you. Something to think about.